I am the Master, and you will obey me. Listen to Dan Hadley on Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, or face the consequences.
Thanks, Master. Has he gone? Yeah. Time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network, with me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's King of the Geeks, and ringmaster of this show at least. Now, this could be your first show, or maybe you've been through our double doors before. Well, whichever. We're a wide-ranging, irreverent, non-gatekeeping, just straight-talking show for everybody. Whatever decade or century you started watching, reading or listening along to the extraordinary adventures of the Time Lord, our hero, Doctor Who, and we talk about it all on this show. And we've even been known to have a few laughs along the way. So come and step into this TARDIS and share our journey together here on Type 40. Hello, here we are again with another hypnotic edition of the show and a conversation positively buzzing with creative, never mind, Artron energy when we go behind the pop shields and open the Word documents over at Black Glove Studio. I've got two guests from this increasingly productive team of people making unofficial Doctor Who audio drama. They're here to talk about the entire process behind their most ambitious project, at least for now. The 7-part serial, The Final Game. Plenty of you will be aware of why that particular title is of such significance to classic Doctor Who. And even if you're not, there's a parallel story to tell that's admirable and exciting. But before we get going, here's a reminder that each and every edition of our show, past, present and future, is a tap or two away on the device of your choice if you know where to look. There's details about all of that coming later on, as well as a mind lock with the Matrix itself. To us, that's the Fandom Podcast Network. We're going to hear about all the other fabulous, just as geeky shows that they've got going on over there. We've had lots of inquiries since we came back for this season about that intro. All's about to be revealed. Meet the men behind the resurrected original portrayal of the Doctor's best enemy now. Yes, Doctor Who's history on audio stretches back further than many people may think. We're now accustomed to a whole slate of productions, much more content than ever gets made for any other medium really. This whole slate that comes to us on audio through our ears and the devices of our choice. And it's a road that was originally sort of dug up, ready for people to come down decades later by a couple of generations worth really of plucky Doctor Who fans, tech-savvy, creative fans willing to invest their time, their creativity and their passion into creating fresh adventures for the Doctor, his friends and foes. Big Finish itself has its roots in unofficial, non-canonical audio Doctor Who, and you'd be forgiven for thinking they'd got the whole market sewn up, wouldn't you really? it really isn't so. There are still teams of dedicated, talented fans banding together, crafting alternatives, and sort of bending the boundaries, really, of time and space and of licensing rights. I'm joined by some of them today. We've got Chris McKeon here and Terry Cooper. They're from Black Glove. Welcome, gentlemen, to Type 40.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Now, people out there listening might be wondering who a Black Glove. This all sounds a little bit nefarious. Sounds a bit Masonic, but we'll get to all that in a little while, and particularly Terry's involvement in it. I wonder if anybody can guess where Terry comes in with this. But yeah, we're going to start with you,
Yes.
Chris. Was this your baby? Does this all start?
Yes. So yes. So how did it get started? Well, Black Glove Studio got started out of a celebration, which is the centennial of Roger Delgado. And for any listeners who don't know, they probably do, but he is the man who played the Master in the Jon Pertwee era of Doctor Who. The first man to play the Master. I will always say this, of course, which is, for me, that's the greatest irony, because for me, I think the Master first appears in the War Games, as played by Edward Brayshaw, the War Chief character, I think, is the Master.
Controversy already here,
yes.
Terry.
For me, the Master dates back to 1969. But in any case, Roger Delgado was the first man to play officially the Master. And 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, was his 100th anniversary. And even taking a step farther back, for me as a Doctor Who fan, and in other places where I've talked a little bit about this, I grew up watching Doctor Who in America. And I grew up, some of my earliest memories of watching first maybe the War Games, but the Jon Pertwee era. And one of my earliest fan memories, maybe starting to connect continuity in my mind, was after watching Frontier in Space, wondering as a little boy, where is the Master?
Because that was Delgado's final on-screen appearance.
Final on-screen appearance, exactly. And for fans in the 1970s, there's a 3 or 3.5 year wait. For me, it might have been watching it appear to several months. Because it was every week you see an episode or something. So I got through it much more quickly, but even so, I'm thinking, where's the Master? Because he was consistently around. And then eventually finding out through internet research that Roger Delgado had died. And he left behind, a wonderful legacy, but one story that was never made, which is called The Final Game, which would have been at his suggestion, because he felt that he was losing opportunities for work. It was his, not insistence, but suggestion that be his final story.
Suggestion to bring it to a close.
Suggestion to bring it to a close. And so, but it was left undone, and so that was replaced by the story Plan the Spiders, which was Jon Pertwee's swan song. And so when Roger Delgado's 100th birthday came around, I felt that there was still an opportunity that was a good opportunity and time to do some type of celebration. Now, people might recognize my name a little bit because I wrote the sixth Doctor Regeneration story and rematch with the Valeyard novel, Times Champion, a few years ago. And so I had a little bit of, at least some confidence in writing.
That was a very high-profile fan,
Yes.
unofficial book, wasn't it? It sold very, very well, and it got some great reviews.
Yes, we did. Well, yes, thank you. That was done with a lot of love because, and a lot of heartache in a way, because it was co-written by the late Doctor Who book author Craig Hinton, whom I met at the very end of his life. There were forums. The BBC, I think, had a book forum at the time, and I remember being very interested in doing something with the Valeyard, because that's another
Craig was very active in fandom as well, wasn't he? He wrote for Doctor Who magazine.
Yes, he was a wonderful guy. I only met him once personally. He came to a convention over here, but just before his death. But wonderful person and wonderful man, and he was very generous. And when he found out that I wanted to do something with the Valeyard, because found out more research. Oh my goodness, Colin Baker's time was missing so many stories, so to speak, on screen, and there was no conclusion to the Valeyard. I wanted to do something. So did he. He had done stuff with the Valeyard in the books. So in the 1990s.
I remember. And
so I had come across this some years later, and so I said, well, I'd love to do something about it. And he said, you know what, let's try. And he had pitched an idea at the BBC, but it was ultimately rejected. And he was generous. He said, well, let's, for fun, let's get it online out there. You seem to have some good writing skills, and you're passionate about Doctor Who and the Valeyard. But he died. He died of a heart attack, and so through wonderful circumstances and such, I was able to, other Doctor Who people, I was approached by Simon Gary to try to get it done for Big Finish, and it was a long shot because we knew it was going to be a novel, and we couldn't get the rights for that. David J. Howe of Tellus Publishing approached me and said, would you like to do it as a charity publication? And we did, and for the British Heart Foundation, because Craig Kent had died of a heart attack, and it went very well, and I was very appreciative and happy to take part. Because of that, I had some confidence as a writer, and so I thought the most appropriate thing to do would be to dramatize in some way the final game. But I decided against doing it as a book because I felt that the age of being able to create a Doctor Who book as a charity publication, but even a book in general, being very honest, you still have good Doctor Who books out there, but there aren't many Doctor Who books being made anymore, at least at this time. There are a lot of audios being made, and so I mean, many. I think that I guess in the Wilderness years, kind of before my time, but in the Wilderness years, that really was the forefront of Doctor Who fiction. You wanted to get something out there, and you could get it published. It was a book.
The book range was always going 2 titles a month, pretty much unbroken for most of the
Exactly.
90s.
So books were the main forefront. Times Champion was a callback to that time, but even then it was kind of a bygone era. So I decided, let's see if we can do an audio, and as an audio form. So I'd never done that before, but I happen to have a free software kind of script writing program on my computer called Trelby, and I thought, well, let me try my hand at doing it. So that's how it's, in a way, it got started.
So to go from writing prose to writing scripts.
Yes, that was an interesting situation because you write prose and you can just, you can pack that story, pack your space with as many details as you want, with as many character moments as you want, as many internal monologues as you want. Writing that in a script, not so much, because Doctor Who fans have a kind of a, thanks to Big Finish, and it's a wonderful thing, you have a kind of an expectation of what a Doctor Who audio sounds like. If you go around...
Yeah, it's a high bar.
Yes, exactly. Very high bar.
And of course having the official status as well.
So number one, you don't want to say, okay, this is Big Finish stuff. No, because I'm almost a one-man show. Not quite, but I have a few people like Terry and other actors involved. But I wanted to make something as good as polished and as capable as possible. So I really put upon myself to say I want to write something very good. And so I studied a little bit of how to write a script, an audio script, interior, exterior, so to speak, and then even put that into audio so you can design the sound accordingly. But even before I wrote it, I was taking part in a charity anthology, writing a prose anthology for the Master, called the Masterpieces. I don't know if you've heard of that at all, but it was a very nice little charity anthology about the Master. And I was approached actually by Ian McLaughlin, who wrote. He's a creator of Aramem from the Doctor Who audios, the Fifth Doctor Companion.
Oh yes,
wonderful guy, Ian. And he said, Chris, I've heard of this. Would you like to take part? You love the Master, and I said yes. So I started, as I'm writing my story, we hit March 1st of 2018. And I thought, you know what? I have this idea to do the final game. It was kind of my idea to do it as this whole process that I just told you occurred like this, kind of a snap of the fingers, like, I'd like to do an audio. So all this thing, my thought process happened very quickly.
So you have the sparks of it, and it's only afterwards when you commit yourself, you almost commit yourself emotionally to going on down this creative road, and then worry about how you're going to get there afterwards. But I think being within the Doctor Who community and having, like you say, having those contacts with like-minded people who are going to encourage you and work with you, and then of course you've got the cooperative of Doctor Who fans all around. And speaking of which, this is where I want to bring in Terry, because you're an old school Doctor Who fan as well, aren't you, Terry?
Yeah.
We're not going to reveal quite your connection to this production yet, but where did you start with Doctor Who? When did you start watching?
Oh, well, I was born in London, and the first time I actually knew about Doctor Who, I must have been 6 or 7, I think. The first episode I ever remember watching is The Green Death, and I think Doctor Who then was on a Saturday afternoon. And because my family are Welsh, even though we were living in London, my dad is from Wales. The Green Death was set in Wales, so that probably gave him something to watch about miners in Wales. Etc.
United the whole family.
Yeah, and from there, we knew a young kid who lived like 2 doors down in the street, and he had this whole shelf of Target Doctor Who books. So my brother. My older brother, befriended him, and he said, "You got to, see it." And he was using the kid like a library. So he'd go down and bring back 5 books at a time, and we share them out. So I started finding out about the Cybermen, the Daleks, and that kind of thing. I don't have a lot of memories of the Jon Pertwee era, but Tom Baker is when I think everyone around my age got into it. So yeah, I mean, through Tom Baker to Peter Davison, kind of started falling off the idea of Colin Baker, which is ironic because I know him quite well now and I've worked with him. But I told that Colin Baker to his sister, said, "You weren't my favorite Doctor." He goes, "That's all right. I wasn't my favorite Doctor either." But yeah, I mean, I dipped in now and again from Colin Baker onwards. I think it's my love of the Daleks and the Cybermen, especially the Cybermen, has kept me watching ever since, really.
You're what we'd call a lifer.
Yeah, I am, yeah.
That's wonderful.
But you're also a fiercely creative man as well, aren't you? I understand you work in production design and graphic design, and you make costumes and all that sort of thing. But specifically with regard to this, you're also a performer,
yes,
aren't you? So I wonder if you'd like to reveal what do you do in the final game? Who do you play? What do you bring to life?
Okay, well, I'll just give you a little bit of backstory there. When I heard that Chris was doing the final game, I was looking for an audio that I could do, because I've done different things in the past. I've even played the Doctor once in a small audio, but it was just a kind of introductory 10 minutes where the Doctor gets killed and regenerates into a woman, and that was years ago. But I've done quite a lot of audio stuff, and I was looking around, and when I heard about Chris has won the final game, I thought, well, I'd like to have a role in this. Being British, there's always room for random British people, British accents in Doctor Who, because it's all the kind of...
Yeah, Chris is nodding.
Yeah, I mean, because Doctor Who is traditionally made and shot in Britain, you've got the whole, the gamut of British actors to choose from. So if you're going to need unit soldiers or anything like that, or even Time Lords, they're all going to have British accents. So I thought I could do something like that. So I said to Chris, can I audition for the Brigadier? Not that I'm particularly good at doing the Brigadier's voice, but I thought, I'm British, I can do a kind of, you there, 5 rounds rapid, that kind of thing. It's fairly sure, it's chroma, that kind of thing. But I thought, it's close, but not quite there. As far as Doctor Who impressions go, I don't really do many. I mean, I can do Cybermen, I can do, I've done Davros in the past, but they involve a sound effect, a voice effect. Same with K9, but impressions, I can't really do many Doctor impressions. So I sent in my auditions to Chris of the Brigadier, and he came back to me and said, okay, not bad, but have you thought of doing the Master? And I grew up, like I say, with the Tom Baker era, and I saw mostly Anthony Ainley's Master. I thought, well, we'll see what I can do. So I watched a ton of YouTube clips and some Pertwee videos just to kind of get my head around, much like most impressionists do, they familiarize themselves with the voice. And so I basically sent Chris my audition, which was me rereading every line or clip that I've watched. So I didn't have a script to read. I just basically said all the things that Delgado said in some of his clips, and Chris came back and said, "Wow, that's really good. That's a great Master." I'm like, "Is it?" Because it's such a new impression for me. It doesn't feel that authentic in a way, but a lot of people have said, "Oh, this guy's a good Roger Delgado," and I think, well, is it probably because of my age, or I'm sort of the same age as Roger, and I'm English, and whatever. But I'm playing the Master in the final game.
That is the role, really, in this production, is it? Even when the Master isn't in our ears, everything that's going on sort of revolves around him.
He's
really.
the Emperor Palpatine.
Chris teases us.
He's the Phantom Menace who's got his machinations of everything. But again, like I say, I wasn't hunting out a lead role because I didn't think I could sound like the Master. I didn't think I could sound like any of the Doctor or any of the main characters. So I just thought, well, I'll be Unit Soldier number 6. Yes sir, no sir. Get killed 3 minutes later. But then Chris says, if you're willing, do the Master for me. And I was like, okay, great, I'll do that.
Opposite, it's Marshall who plays the Doctor, isn't it? He's fantastic as the Doctor too. But so to have a performance as as uncanny as that. He really is. You'd have to get on the same level, and I sincerely think that you do, Terry. Do you want to give us a quick blast of the Master now?
I am usually referred to as the Master, universally. The thing about the Master is he's very theatrical. What he says and what he does. Yes, Doctor, I've caught you again. And the thing about that is...
Actually, you have to give me a moment. I've got shivers going up my spine now. I feel proper creeped out. Nobody's going to argue with any of that. That is the Master.
I think it has got better over time. You know, over the 7 episodes I've done of the final game, I'm more in my stride. To begin with, I was probably more nerves and just trying to think, how's it going to sound right? But yeah, like I say, I surprised myself that people have come back and, because the last thing I wanted was to appear as the Master opposite Marshall, who does the most amazing Jon Pertwee you've ever heard, and I didn't want to be the weak link in the chain there. He's got this great cast, and then you've got a guy doing, hello, I'm a posh man trying to be the Master, and it would be, awful. Yeah. But something...
I can only imagine how Chris must have felt when he heard you do that for the first time, and to get there, you must have felt like it hit the sort of lottery.
Well, I can tell you how I felt. When I was casting for the Master, Terry was the last person that I announced. Not quite the last person that I cast, but in the main cast, he was the last one I announced. But he was the hardest to find. Marshall was fairly easy to find. I knew going into it that going from the bottom up, essentially could be, okay, the smallest characters. I still wanted to hold them to a good standard. For example, say the woman that you see in Spearhead from Space when the Auton swarm is coming. She's the first female officer you see in unit. Well, she's in this story. She has only one little brief scene, and that's it in Spearhead from Space. But even then, I asked the actresses, can you sound like her as best you can? But I still felt like they could be far away or close, but as long as they sound a little bit, that's all right. But there could be some room. The farther up you went up the chain of command, so to speak, or the cast chain, higher up to the larger roles, I wanted to be as close as possible. What I really knew was to make this a Roger Delgado, because it was a Roger Delgado centennial celebration. It really had to be whoever was the Doctor and the Master, because you can't have the Master without the Doctor. And in my opinion, vice versa. Those two, and also probably to a certain extent the Brigadier actor and the Sarah Jane actress, had to be crucial. They had to sound the same. But certainly the Doctor and the Master had to sound spot correct. Marshall was easy to find because he already had some YouTube clips of himself doing a Jon Pertwee impression. But trying to find the Master, I'll put it this way, it's very easy to find. Not to dismiss anyone's quality or their passion for the trying to do the Roger Delgado voice, and I had several that were very good. But it's very easy to find people that are a capable voice actor that can do a very capable kind of omni-master sound. A kind of menacing, very rich voice that deeper voice and such. Very, very, very. And there's an abundance, and they are very good. It is extremely hard to find someone that can do a competent, even close, or even remotely close, Roger Delgado voice. It is very hard.
That's the kind of thing that surprised me because, like I say, I'd never considered myself a Doctor Who impersonator. And if someone had asked me to find a Jon Pertwee impersonator, the only person I knew of is the BBC guy, John Culshaw. But I think the hardest part, obviously, for you is obviously to find the Doctor. But if you had a Doctor in mind, an actor to play the Doctor, that was great. Mm-hmm. But then, like I said, I didn't want to come in and be the slightly substandard Master. And if you'd have turned around and said, I've heard your audition and it's not that great. We want this to be spot on. And even now, it just takes some convincing for me to think, is it really? But, in the X-Men comics and movies, when a kid hits 16 or whatever, and they suddenly discover they got mutant powers. Well, basically, I woke up one morning and I thought, I've discovered that I can sound like Roger Delgado, and that hasn't been that long ago. It wasn't like I've been doing Jack Sparrow for about 11, 12 years, so that's second nature. But to do a voice that everyone says is really good, it's still, I need to be convinced, because I'm thinking, really? Do I? Okay, fair enough.
Still a bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
there.
yeah, totally. It's like I don't think, I do, but I'm happy to.
Definitely not an imposter. You are absolutely.
Well, can I tell you that when I decided to do a Skype call with myself and Marshall, because I decided that Marshall would be the doctor, Pertwee's doctor, and then these various men. I think we had 3 at that time to voice audition for Delgado, and so they pair off each other. When Terry came along, and we heard the possibility, and I heard his first audition, although he sounds very good. When he came along, like I said, before we started recording, that this is the first time I've actually seen Terry's face in a video when we talk, because we've talked before and a few times, but it was just audio. Well, then this is important to this particular story, is that when we had our 3-way call happening, I had my video on, Marshall had his video on, so I could see him, he could see me. We could hear Terry, we couldn't see his face. I don't know if he could. I don't think he could see us.
Yeah, this was Skype, so I don't have a webcam.
Sure.
I was just using audio only, so I could see you two, but I couldn't. Okay. I didn't have a camera, so you couldn't see me.
Okay. Well, that changes maybe some small part of that I didn't know, but at the time I didn't think you could see us. And so when Terry, when you started talking, I think I've told you this before. When you started talking, what it was we used as our sample a scene from part 2 of the final game, where the Doctor and the Master are talking to each other, building a device, and just having kind of a friendly conversation. And when Terry started vocalizing the Master, Marshall's eyes went wide. He started shaking around. His hands started flying all over the place, because he had never talked to Terry before. I had, I think briefly, but he had never talked to Terry. Marshall went nuts. Marshall, you could tell, was floored, thrilled, and amazed at the sound of Terry's voice. And so when we went through the scene, and I was doing the same thing, because I was actually hearing it in my ears for the first time, and it was amazing. And then hearing Terry paired up with Marshall was golden. But when we were done, we sent Terry away. We said, "Well, thank you, Terry. We'll talk to you." And I was convinced at that point. But when Terry left, Marshall and I stayed in the conversation for a few more minutes talking about it. When I said to him, "So what did you think?" And he said, "Chris, it's like Roger Delgado joined our Skype call." And that was it. I thought, Terry's the Master. Terry is the Roger Delgado Master. And really, it was so beautiful.
Let me just say this, that for as much as you said Marshall was freaking out at hearing my impersonation of Roger, I was freaking out when I first heard Marshall. Before I put the Delgado voice on, he was talking to a Brit. A disembodied voice of a Brit, and it's like, well, it's probably not that much of a leap to go from a Brit to Roger Delgado, as I can imagine. But in the case of Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp has got to lose his American accent, do this sort of it's a slightly well-spoken but Cockney accent for Jack Sparrow, and he's got the slurring and everything. So he's got more hurdles. It's further removed, and the same with Marshall. I was talking to him, and I heard this American kid's voice. And I thought, how? Because I regard as Pertwee's voice to be one of the hardest to do, because there aren't that many people who do it. Very, very few. So, when he said, "Now listen, my dear chap," or whatever he says, listen, Mark, hand me that thing over there. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, to me, it was like exactly what you said. I was like, Jon Pertwee has just jumped over the Skype call here. It's like, this is absolutely incredible. And that obviously put the frighteners on me, because I'm like, oh my, I've got to be at least as good as this guy. Otherwise, it's going to be Jon Pertwee playing against some bit part actor who's been asked to stand in, So I'm, like I say, I'm completely a fan of Marshall's Jon Pertwee.
So once that you two guys are on board, Marshall and yourself, Terry, then Chris, your project starts to come to life, and the material can start to be the story can be planned and plotted, and the material sent out to these good people. Because as you mentioned earlier on, the original story, the final game, was commissioned for season 11 of Doctor Who, wasn't it, by Barry Letts at the time from Robert Sloman, and it would have closed out the season as a six-parter, one would assume, because that's how things tended to be, and it was intended to close what we would call now in modern terms an arc, wasn't it? The entire arc of the story of the Master that had began with Roger Delgado in Terror of the Autons specifically. But even though this story was commissioned, what actually exists? Does it exist as a storyline breakdown? Did you have any raw material that you could work from, or does it all come from the mind of Chris McKeon?
It almost all comes, being very honest, it almost comes from my mind. The only thing that we know, on the DVD of The Planet of the Spiders, there is a documentary called The Final Curtain, which talks about the death of Roger Delgado, and of course as a backdrop, his time as the Master and what would have been the lead up to the final game. According to Terrence Dix, what exists of that was simply, he says, it never got beyond discussion. So there, as far as we know, there are no scripts apparently, and not even a story outline. Because again, Roger Delgado, you think of the timing. Roger Delgado dies in June of 1973. When did they film Planet of the Spiders? And they filmed Planet of the Spiders in, I believe, March and April of 1974. So 9 to 10 months after Delgado's death. So right around the time that Delgado died probably is about the time that Robert Sloman probably would have started writing the scripts, around that time. So there are no scripts, not a story outline. What we know is, according to Terrence Dix, is that, of course, it would have featured the Master. We would have obviously featured the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. No mention of Unit, but I imagine it would have been. But even so, the only thing that was thought is that they would have revealed the relationship, true nature of the relationship between the Doctor and the Master. And Barry Letts has said that they felt that they were brothers.
There's a couple of versions of that. There's the line that says they could have been revealed as brothers, and there was another idea, a more sort of conceptually sort of far out idea, that they were even one and the same person, the ego and the id and all this sort of, something very, very high concept. So there's a little bit of grey area there, but the principle's the same.
Yes, principle's the same, that they are not just simply two students that became, if they were at the academy together, two Time Lords, two Gallifreyans that became Time Lords that met each other by happenstance or whatever at their version of school.
So as such, apart from a few quotes from the gentlemen involved, there was very little research you could actually do,
but there was one thing that helped, which was that Terrence Dix had said in his interview portions of that documentary that there maybe would have been some type of catastrophe that would have forced the Doctor and the Master to work together, and at the end the Master perhaps would have redeemed himself and maybe saved the Doctor in the end, but it would have been left ambiguous. That I'd heard before, that maybe the Master would have saved the Doctor at an explosion. Some people thought an explosion or such. But the thing that I didn't know is that there would have been some catastrophe. So I was able to use that, at least. And that general framework to think, and if you're asking how I came up with the storyline, taking those ideas and I kind of treat it like a chessboard or something, or at least a game board. Because
when you listen back to this, and I've heard a majority of the final game now, although it's very respectful, it's clear that there's a great in-depth knowledge of Doctor Who, and specifically this era of Doctor Who, with the various characters and threads that you put together. It's modern in many respects. It's of a great scope on a broader canvas, and yet it feels right in the sweet spots where it doesn't get too big for it to be not Doctor Who anymore. You can imagine this being filmed with a couple of cameras in a three-walled set. That must be the toughest rope to walk.
Part of my ethos, which was, although it's an audio adventure, I don't have the budget and I don't have a time machine and such. I can't film it as it would have been in 1974, but my ethos going into it was, this will be an audio presented as best I can, as if it were a television story from 1974. So that meant I put myself in the mindset on this chessboard, so to speak, or this game board, whatever. Okay, which characters will be there? And I thought, the Third Doctor will be there. Sarah Jane will be there. The Delgado Master will be there. who else will be? Those three are certain: Doctor, Companion, and main villain. Who else should be there? I thought, well, Unit should be there because they should have some closure, and they were most in that story. So that means the Brigadier, that means Sergeant Benton. Because it's season 11, I thought, okay, no Captain Yates. Laying that aside because of keeping in the continuity.
In modern television terms, in event television, for example, if you were wrapping up a storyline or an entire show, which is effectively what happens every few years on Doctor Who, they would go to greater lengths, wouldn't they, to encapsulate the entire series in a conclusion. So you would reach back to it and pick up other characters, whoever was left alive, and you would bring them into the present. Yes. You would try and close out the entire thing in a very round and satisfying way, and almost as if almost in a way in which an 8-year-old watching who may sort of think, oh yeah, this is a great story, but I wish that we weren't just getting an envelope from Joe Grant coming through the post of the Doctor in this. I wish that we could see Joe Grant one last time, and I wish that we could do this and do that and touch that and hear that and feel this, and you're able to do that. This gives you the scope to open it up in those ways.
I went into this story thinking to myself, okay, if I want it to feel like as if it were 1974 all over again. Saturday. What does Tom Baker say? Sometimes in the audios, it's Saturday night tea time in 1977. Well, I thought in my mind, I went to thinking, okay, as if Jon Pertwee were saying it's Saturday day tea time in 1974 all over again. So with that, I thought, okay, well, to prepare, because I didn't just think I want this person, I want that person, I want this situation and such. If you want full disclosure, I thought I'm going to go back and watch all of the stories with Delgado's master. But then I thought I should also, because Sarah Jane is in the story, I should watch her stories. And then I just realized, you know what? Because the Doctor's there, I should watch his. And I just thought, I'm just going to watch the Pertwee era so that I can immerse myself fully in these characters. And
so going through that process, how did the storyline start to sort of reveal itself in a linear way, or was it more as a construction? Could you see the whole thing, or did you just sort of tread one step at a time? And how did you, and when you were assembling these scripts, how quickly were Terry and the other voice artists able to sort of get the material?
It's kind of both, all of the above. I very quickly realized, going off of the idea, what Terrence Dick said, that there had to be some catastrophe. I thought to myself, well, what catastrophe could you have? Again, keeping in the framework of 1974, what would fit in a 1974 context that would bring the Master and the Doctor together to fight a common enemy? And I thought the logical conclusion is the Daleks. Because the last time we saw the Master on screen was Frontier in Space and Planet of the Daleks by extension, where the Master's teaming up with the Daleks. I thought it would be a wonderful thing to explore what's perhaps the fallout of that adventure, what is maybe if there's any more back history behind that adventure. Once I had that, okay, Daleks. That's the catastrophe. Because I thought maybe you could have this or that, but I thought I don't want to dip into future eras, and I can't really see the Ice Warriors coming into play.
No, and the Pertwee era is very much defined by the fact that it's the era where there's lots of invasions coming to the Earth. That was a deliberate attempt, and that did stay. Even though they did venture away from planet Earth, and there was, with the dematerialization circuit and everything else, it ultimately did come back to being an Earth-based show, right at the end as well. So by making the sort of ultimate alien invasion story that was right for that era, I can completely see why you reached for the Daleks.
Yeah, because I thought let's make it a big, an actual, full, complete, in a way, new series style, but in a 1974 context, which would be, not as many Daleks necessarily or ships flying around in the sky, but kind of a clandestine invasion of the Daleks of Earth in 1970. It would be 1975, but that's where it's set if people want to know, 1975. And but done in a way that's a slow burn.
It's time we took a little break now. It's just our regular spot where we take a few minutes to tell you about some of the other conversations going on across the Fandom Podcast Network. On all those other shows, whatever your fandom, there's bound to be something here in this little lot just for you. Check it out.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to the Fandom Podcast Network and all of the other awesome shows we have to offer. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, our weekly pop culture news podcast. Blood Kings, our Highlander podcast. Couch Potato Theater, our podcast celebrating our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite pop culture topics. End Zone, the NFL podcast. Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville podcast. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our Doctor Who podcast. Lethal Mullet, a 1980s and 90s action film podcast. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. And our newest show, Making Treks, a new Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. You can enjoy all of these great Fandom Podcast Network shows on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. Fandom Podcast Network is also on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can also find us on Facebook under Fandom Podcast Network. You can also email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter under Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Yes, we've teased and tantalised you there. Now let us clothe you too. Head over to tpublic.com, search for the Fandom Podcast Network, and you'll find a store full of the team colours for all those shows on t-shirts, hats, mugs, and a TARDIS full of other items. Treat yourself, treat your other selves, and it all goes to support the network continuing to fill your ears with 100% fabulous fandom goodness. So, when you got this material, Terry, did it seem like ridiculously ambitious to you? How did it feel to you when you got sent these scripts, presumably electronically through email or whatever else? Did it surprise you with every twist and turn? Did you think, oh, could this get any bigger? Can this get any more ambitious?
No, I mean, I read them as they came in, and I could see it was a big and quite fitting to be a grand adventure for what is essentially a celebration of Roger Delgado. Set in this style and feel of a 1974 Pertwee adventure. Obviously, I think if you take on too much of the entire scope of things, it might become a bit daunting, especially as I find myself plugged into one of the co-lead roles. So I focused on the majority of my scenes, which are either with the Daleks or with the Doctor. And the first thing that jumped out to me was how well the dialogue was written, because, this is no slight on Chris, but being from the other side of the pond, sometimes the quintessential Englishness of some of the dialogue that you get, I mean, even more so back in the 70s, because every actor was RADA trained and part of the establishment, and it was all my dear chap and all this kind of stuff. And that's another hurdle to kind of get over. Not only have you got to write for Brits, but you've got to write in this kind of days gone by, very clipped style. You can see that obviously, Chris, when you immersed yourself in the entire Pertwee era, that helped to inform the way everyone was speaking to each other. So when you've got a new character that no one's seen on TV, such as the Prime Minister, etc., you can instantly get a sort of handle on how he would speak and the dialect of the day. I was expecting to have to come back with some notes and say, well, he wouldn't say that and he wouldn't say this, but I don't think I did really, because again, I'm a very visual person, so I just try and visualize a 3-wall set, as you say, Dan, and Roger Delgado and Jon Pertwee hunched over a TARDIS console going, pass me this tool, thank you, Doctor, and have you ever thought, and it's just, they're going into it, and I think if it feels authentic in my mind, and it doesn't feel out of place, then it's obviously well written.
Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because as high stakes as these absolutely are, and as explosive as the production value is on this entire story, it really, the soundscapes, it just feels so full. As much as all that is there, this is a mannered piece for the most part, and it's got in the same way that Roger Delgado was quite a mannered man. It was a mannered performance, but you've got that sort of suave quality definitely in that character. But it is, I think, in all its best moments, the moments that make the hair stand up on the back of a fan's neck are the character moments. I feel the characters are propelling this, Chris. Yeah. The temptation, and with this huge story, it could have been the case where the story could have run away with you as a writer.
In kind of circling back to one thing you asked me that I had forgotten to answer was, how quickly did I write this, or how did I get to it? I made a very special part. How I outlined it was and this actually matters in a strange way. I just wrote the outline on online, through Microsoft Word, whatever, and I set myself a goal: 1 page per episode. And so, keeping that as a framework, okay, it's not episode 1 will be 1 page, episode 2 will be another page, and so to speak. It's not going to spill over into a second page. If I start spilling over into a second page, I've got to trim it. I've got to fit it on this page. Self-editing. And so that meant, okay, what will be the character beats? That helped me keep in mind and discipline myself. What character beats do I want this episode? What story beats do I want this episode? I put myself in the mindset of knowing that Jon Pertwee and Roger Delgado were best friends in real life. And so there would have been this sense of, if not them writing the scripts, that they would have perhaps said, look, even in their performance, this is really about us, the characters. Added stuff. You could have this external storyline of explosions and invasions, but there has to be an internal storyline, which is the characters of the Doctor and the Master reaching some, if not reconciliation, if not even understanding, at least some reckoning through the dialogue and through the interactions, simply involvement in the two characters. And I approached it certainly with a sense of wistfulness, which is, this is the last. I could see Roger and John in my mind, if this in an alternate reality, if they were there in 1974, he's still alive, Roger Delgado. I could see them talking to each other off set or on screen, or going through the scripts, maybe reading them together, saying, "This is the last time that we're going to play together. The last time that we're going to work together in this story, and so let's do our best." And so I thought, let's keep centered these characters. This is all about the Doctor and the Master, and how they react to each other in a conflict, and how that conflict changes or informs one another of the character. And so that's how I kept anchored by that structure. Write each script, and really also that one last thing you asked, how quickly these things were able to get to the actors. In a way, very quickly, I was able to write these scripts with that self-discipline and that North Star. Okay, it's about the characters and everything around them, but it's how the characters are reacting to things. I was able to write the scripts very quickly. I wouldn't have been able to write them as quickly if I had not immersed myself, what Jerry was saying about the sounds of the characters and the new characters coming and being able to fit, like the Prime Minister, or like his right-hand man, Sam Jackson. I wouldn't have been able to do it that quickly and that perhaps authentically if I had not watched the Pertwee episodes. The irony is I did not watch, and this is purposeful, I did not watch Planet of the Spiders.
I'm not surprised, because Planet of the Spiders, it's got its fans, that story has. The people who love it really love it. But the one thing, and it's lots of fun, and there are lots of moments in that do stand out, and it is a nice end to the year. It does conjure up something of what we've been speaking about, but it does always feel like a little bit of a compromise. And the one thing it absolutely isn't, it is not a character piece at all. You do feel that there's something missing in that respect from it. So you offering this as, you're not wiping Planet of the Spiders out of continuity at all, not by a long chalk, but as an alternative, as an additional finale. I feel this does nothing but adds to the era, and it completely exists sort of alongside, really. And for all that you've pulled on the strings, and you have reached back into the corners of the Pertwee era, and I'm not going to spoil all the surprises for people who haven't heard the final game, because we do really want as many fans as possible to go and find this and listen to it and enjoy it, and to talk about it and to share it. So we're not going to spoil it, but there are Easter eggs too, aren't there? There are little nuggets for people to find. Did that get dropped in after the fact? Did things dawn on you later on in the process? Oh, that can connect there, I can pop that in there, that might be quite nice.
While I was writing the scripts, when I wrote the outlines came first. And then in the process of writing the scripts, what you just described will start to happen. Oh, I could do this, I could do that. It started to dawn on me that how I was approaching writing the final game in the context of what does it fit alongside Planet of the Spiders. I was trying to approach it as if it were a kind of a second round of Frontier in Space, Planet of the Daleks. If anyone wants to know why it's 7 parts and not 6, is that when I was writing the 6th page of the outline, I thought, okay, 6 parts, that's what it would have been. I realized there was too much story left to fit it into one, so I made the compromise, let's make it a 7-part story. But once you listen to part 7, you will, I believe, understand why it is 2 halves of not necessarily the same story, but 2 halves of an overall theme or an arc.
And you, obviously, Terry, have you already recorded part 7? Is this all committed? And is it satisfying for you, the whole process?
It's satisfying, but more importantly than that, it's authentic in the way that it wraps up a Doctor Who adventure on TV as you'd imagine, but it also, like you say, it does its job of giving treating all the characters with a certain amount of respect and the correct level of importance, because it is called Doctor Who. It's the Doctor's show. He's the hero, but it still does justice to the Master and that incarnation of the Master. It just feels very authentic. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of the people who hear it, whether it's on YouTube or on podcasts, they like about it, because it feels genuine. It doesn't feel like someone who doesn't know what they're doing acting wise, or someone who doesn't know what they're doing writing wise. It feels like everyone is versed in Doctor Who, and you get that in the characters.
Yes.
But as a performer, Terry, how did you record your content? Did you do it across Zoom or Skype, for example, with other actors, or did you record your material, your lines separately, individually, and it was all put together afterwards? What was the process like for you?
Most of the time when I'm doing audio recording, I'm usually on my own. I will go into something if I'm confident enough that I've spoken to the writer or the director, and we've got an agreement on how it should be done. I'm not one of the people who would send over 12 takes of every line, because after a while, if you've committed yourself to a number of takes, you just start doing 12 versions of everything, whether it's needed or not. So I will go with my instinct for the first take, then I'll listen to it myself and think, is that right? Does that sound like it, the way it should be toned or intoned or whatever? I would rather send off 1 take or 2 takes. Generally just 1, because if it's not right, then I can be asked to come back. Can you come back and read episode 1, line 15, because it needs to match what the Doctor said there, or it needs to be angrier, or that kind of thing. But I say, if the script is written well enough, and it was, that you get an idea of what mood everyone's in and how much energy into a performance. So I recorded all my lines on my own, just with a microphone in front of me and a quiet day, and just go through them. And then once I've recorded everything in an episode, I'll listen back I'll grab all the wave files, put them into an audio player, and just play them loudly and just listen to them all the way through. And if there's anything that I've noticed I've mispronounced the word, or
you're able to do kind of what Chris was talking about when he self-edits.
Yeah.
You're able to sort of take a few steps back from your own performance, and sort of hone in on anything you feel that you may have.
There are certain bits in takes where I might take a breath that's too loud, so I will go into that, and I can decrease the volume just on that breath so you can't hear it. Or if something needs to be said a little bit quicker, I can snip out a space between 2 words. So if someone was saying, "Good morning, Doctor," like this, then you think, "Oh, that's a bit dragged out," so I could just snip a little bit at the end of morning, and that gap, so it'll just be, "Good morning, Doctor." It'll be a little bit closer, a little bit tighter. So that's the thing I've got from doing years of commercials and things as well, where things have to be within a certain time frame. You've got 15 seconds to get all these words in.
Yeah. And I will say, in terms of the brilliance, in my opinion, and really it is the brilliance of Terry's performances, when I was writing the scripts, I definitely tried to have the voices of the characters in my heads. I can say honestly that I had in my mind, since all these voices, Nicholas Courtney, Roger Delgado, Jon Pertwee, Elizabeth Sladen, everyone, are ringing in my head when I'm writing these, that I had, not it has to sound this way, but I had a thought of, in my mind, okay, he not so much delivers this line, but in a general sense, this is how Roger Delgado sounds when he delivers the line. When I heard Terry's performances, sometimes they sounded similarly, just in general, sometimes a little different, but I never thought, okay, that needs to change. I thought, great, that sounds like Roger Delgado. His delivery informed my reception of the character. I thought, he sounds great. Because, yeah, of course, why didn't I think of that when I was writing? Of course he sounds that way. And I'm not pointing to specific examples, but just if there were ever, like, oh, he sounded more bright or darker than I thought great.
There's little things in the Doctor's voice and the Master's voice that the actors did, which wasn't on the written page. And I found with the Master, some of the things he does, he puts in a little noise before a word. You'll get what I mean when I do an impression. But I've noticed the only other actor who does a similar kind of thing is Roddy McDowall when he was doing Planet of the Apes. So where I would say, right, that's fine. Would anyone like a cup of tea? Right. Roger Delgado go, that's fine. Would anyone like a cup of tea? This is like at the start. Yes, Doctor. There's that little, and Roddy McDowall do the same. I was thinking that it's like a breath, but there's
a little
there's a noise in there. Yeah. So it's like one of these things. Yes, Doctor. It's kind of just.
It's to imply a spontaneity, isn't it? And a courtesy. Oh, I've remembered my manners. It's that kind of thing.
And also it also gives the impression that it is more spontaneous and less, just regurgitating what was on the printed page. And like I used to say, and that's a very old-fashioned way of speaking. But Marshall was doing the same kind of thing with the way Pertwee would drag a word out, or
the flourishes.
Yeah, and also Pertwee does a lot of. He runs out of breath while talking, so he's almost squeezing the last few words out. And John Coleshaw does this, and you noticed it. That, my dear chap, it's kind of like this. It's yes, so Joe. It's almost like he's got no breath left, and he's just trying to get those last few words out. Without that, you lose a small dimension of reality from the actor.
I'm not an impressionist, so I wouldn't be able. I don't know how to describe it as Terry might. But same thing with our Sarah Jane actress. They really immerse themselves in the roles, because our Sarah Jane actress in the story actually is also an American. She's from Vermont, I think. Surprise, huh?
Genuinely surprised.
She immersed herself in the role, and so she was able to get the sense of the character style. She described how the character moves, how she looks of Sarah Jane.
There are so many great performances in this, and you can see that they've been considered. And I'd like to call out to absolutely everybody on the cast. I'd love to get some more of them on the show at some point, because it does seem a shame not to name check them all, but it probably wouldn't be possible, because this feels like it's a cast of dozens of people. It feels, I don't know whether that is the case, how many people are actually, whether anybody doubled up. It's one of those things where, because it's not complete yet, I haven't looked too much under the hood. I haven't looked up too many details about you, because I don't want to break the spell.
It is a large cast, not a massive cast, not 60 people, but it is a good sized cast, and mostly individual performances. And there's a kind of a sense of symmetry. It's 100 years since his birth. It's 45 years since his death. It seems like it's the right time. People might be interested, but they may not be as motivated to do this as it was at that time. And because of that, you really hear it in the performances. You really hear the sense of people not just simply reading the lines, but they are performing it. I will give a shout out to the voice actors of Sergeant Benton and Captain Yates. I decided to bring Captain Yates into the story, and I think that Johnny Robinson, like Terry said, does a wonderful job of sounding like Richard Franklin, but also just a vocal performance. He's an excellent voice. I think he is by profession an audiobook reader, and I'm sure also an actor and other things. But this is his realm, and you hear it. I will give a shout out to Richard Girl, who plays Sergeant Benton. Oh.
Yeah, Richard Sergeant Benton gets a lot of comments on YouTube, and that people just are blown away, because the cool thing about Benton is he is a grunt. He's just a jobbing soldier, and the temptation is that the actor could come in and go, "Oh, I'm Sergeant Benton, and I'm an action hero," but he doesn't do it. He goes, "Right, miss, yes, miss," and he just plays it like John Levine would. Really
for a moment, I did wonder whether you'd got John Levine back for that.
I wish.
Sincerely did.
I wish, but I will tell you, I just knew he has to. So massive shout out to Richard Girl, because he, as soon as I heard it, it was nailed for me. I just thought I would be a fool not to cast this man as Sergeant Benton. And then of course we have a wonderful sound designer, Gareth Severn, who I definitely want to talk about more. He's amazing.
The soundscapes on it are unique and remarkable, and they take you to a place that I don't think, a precise place that I don't think we've ever been to with Doctor Who on audio before. It sounds like Doctor Who and feels like Doctor Who, but it also feels a little like it's the cousin of the War of the Worlds album, the Jeff Wayne album. That's how it seems to me. It's got a foot in those concept albums of the early to mid 70s, funny enough, and that's why it feels so authentic. And that's why, when you are stepping up something like Doctor Who, which is a tea time adventure show for kids on a really small budget, if you're stepping it up, you've got to be as authentic as you possibly can somewhere along the way, and I really do feel that the balance is completely and utterly right. And I'd like to say, well done to absolutely everybody involved in the final game. But you're not stopping for long, are you, Chris? I understand you've got another Black Glove Studios production pretty much on the starting grid already. You want to tease that a little bit? You can say as much as you.
Yes, I can. I'll tease it. Yes, I'll tease a few things. We have fully recorded another Centennial story, and this is for Peter Butterworth, who played the monk in the William Hartnell years. A story called The Misshapen Planet. Last year was a Centennial for Peter Butterworth.
It's a real Doctor Who legend, Peter Butterworth playing the monk,
and so
originating the character back in 65
and appearing in the Time Middler and the later episodes of the Dalek Master Plan. I've loved trilogies, and so when I found out that he only appeared twice as wonderful, the first recurring single villain in Doctor Who, and therefore the first retroactively Time Lord antagonist, not exactly a villain, but even so, a foe for the Doctor. I wrote this story, The Misshapen Planet. It's a 4-part story, and with the First Doctor, Stephen and Dodo, and the Vord are there. That's part of the story, and so that's coming. There will be a follow-up to the final game, a Fourth Doctor, Roger Delgado Master trilogy. In a nutshell, it is continuing to bridge the gap from the Roger Delgado years to the Deadly Assassin for the Master, so seeing how he ends up in that condition. We also have a Centennial purely dedicated to Jon Pertwee called The Veiled Memory, a dedicated single-episode story for him as a Centennial, set immediately after Spearhead from Space, where he faces the Master. But which Master is the question? And our big thing that we're starting right now, the Sarah Jane Adventures Series 5 Volume 2, which is essentially just an audio adaptations of the last 3 unmade Sarah Jane adventure stories, left unmade because of the sad passing of Elizabeth Slater.
Yeah. And Russell T Davies made these storylines public, didn't he? He wrote articles explaining where the series would have gone for Doctor Who magazine, didn't he? A number of years ago now for a special. So you've got some idea of where he would have taken it to a conclusion.
Yes,
so that
exactly. They're called Meet Mr. Smith, the 13th Floor, which incidentally was produced for kind of a spiritual successor series, Wizards vs. Aliens, and the Battle of Bannerman Road. Just like with the final game, the enthusiastic reaction of other actors coming into to play and that are teenagers and little children that were maybe themselves little children or probably even not hadn't been born yet or something when the Sarah Jane Adventures were airing.
You've got a repertory company now of voice actors who you've worked with, and I'd imagine as long as their work commitments and the other things they've got going on in their lives permit, it sounds like a lot of fun. Is it, Terry? Is it?
Oh, the voice acting is brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I've done quite a bit of paid work, but that's just the sort of boring radio commercials and this kind of thing. I've never really been paid for acting.
You never tried to take over the universe before, have you?
Oh, goodness me. Well, yeah. I mean, when you're in a position of power and you can tell the Doctor what to do, it doesn't get better than that, does it? So I guess it's one of those things that it's a plum roll. Fan audio and fan productions give you the chance to do things you'd never get to do in real life. So, I get to play the Master,
Well, I will say this. I don't know how far my voice on this, what I'm about to say, will carry, but I really, really feel that if Big Finish is looking for a Roger Delgado Master, they cannot find anyone, in my opinion, better than Terry Cooper. And I really hope that if anyone here is listening to this from Big Finish, because you've had Big Finish people before, I think it's inevitable that they will recast the Delgado Master. And,
yeah, they've got quite a lot of masters, actors now, including their own ones.
Yes.
There are people, for example, Chris Walker Thompson, who does the best Patrick Troughton you've ever heard. Although he has done a Big Finish story with Tom Baker, he's not playing the Doctor. He's playing generic man number 16 or whatever. And they still use Fraser Hines to do Patrick Troughton's voice.
One thing that was kind of a sobering thing for me in producing the final game is early in the production, I had the idea of I wanted to present this story in some way to Roger Delgado's widow, but she died shortly before we went into production. And so that couldn't happen. But I thought, well, I would love to be able to present this to his family, but I quickly found out that he has no family left. He had a first wife. His wife that died recently was his second wife. His biographer, I contacted his biographer, who's I think he's an Australian man, and I asked him, is she still alive? And he said, I don't know. He looked, but he can't find any trace of her, and he can't find any trace of any direct family. So it really was no joke. That was a very sobering moment for me, where I realized there's no one left in his family. All we can do to honor his memory is do what we've done, and we have no one to present it to in his family.
For a man who spent a couple of decades, probably close to 3 decades, on screen, in movies and TV shows.
Yeah, he could have easily refused to do TV. I mean, generally, even though production values have gone up, in this century, generally people would see TV as a step backwards from movies. So you very rarely get movie actors doing TV.
And it's strange, isn't it? Because now we know everything about the actors on TV, and whether they want us to, some of them want us to know absolutely everything about them, and others don't. But it's the nature of the press and everything. And so to think there could be a man of this high profile and who was this loved in this particular role alone, but somebody who was so recognisable and so much a common sight on the big and the small screen, whose life is still quite shrouded in mystery, really, and his family, and it's in a sense it adds to the mystique of him. And I know this is completely sort of by the by, but it does add something to the Master too.
Roger Delgado probably is, in terms of the higher profile actors in Doctor Who, the one, like you said, that we know just about the least, because there are no interviews of him. There are no interviews. The only interview that I could find of him is a sentence that he was printed, I think, in the Doctor Who magazine, where he says he enjoys. I think it was in a weird way, perhaps a tease for the final game, and that it's because it was 1973. He was interviewed in 73, and he filmed Frontier Space in October 72. And so shortly before his death, he's interviewed, and he says, "Oh, I enjoy playing the Master. It's such fun, and I hope that I can do it again." That's all we have.
This production, as it stands at the moment, as a tribute, I think he'd be incredibly touched, moved, surprised, and would totally take it in the spirit in which it's been offered. You've more than done him proud, both of you gentlemen, and everybody else involved in the final game. Mission definitely accomplished. I know there's lots of work ahead of you, Terry and Chris, and we'd love to get you back on at a later date to speak more about the production process and voice work and writing and all the rest of it. Chris, we're going to need some links from you now, the best places where people can hear the content that's already available out there, and anywhere you'd like to direct people. They could be listening to this and salivating and need to know as much as they can about the upcoming projects as soon as they can. So hit us with all the links. Where can people see and hear?
Well, we have a Facebook page, Black Glove Studio. Where I'm most active is, and we also have an Instagram page under that same name, Black_Glove_Studio. Where we are most active is on Twitter, @StudioGlove. I think it's capital S, capital G, @StudioGlove. No underscores or anything.
We'll keep watching and follow all those links. Terry, Chris, thank you for your time. It's been delightful to speak to you. Cheers again to Terry and Chris from Black Glove Studio. Go and look them out. New projects are starting to appear from them. And that's our time router kicking in and calling time for now. we'll be back with another edition of Type 40. Look out for that wherever you found this. Maybe it was on the brand new Type 40 podcast feed, hosted at type40.podbean.com by popular demand. Our very own feed. Now we're even easier to find. Or you can search for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn, or the Podbean app. And don't forget, over on YouTube, the world's largest streaming platform. We're still on the Fandom Podcast Network's incredible master feed, of course, with all those other great shows. As ever, you can keep in touch through our social medias, Instagram and Twitter at Type40Doctor Who, even email type40doctorwho@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you're feeling particularly brave and fancy some real-time, extra-dimensional chit-chat, step into the Type 40 Facebook group. I am Dan Hadley. You can find me scattered across all of space and time, though mostly on Twitter and Instagram as the Spacebook, wheezing and groaning, it's my age, and posting about whatever catches my eye, imagination, or both in popular culture, inside and outside of the TARDIS. There's links to all of that in our show notes. We always have the time. If you have the space here on Type 40, thank you for playing our game. Speak to you soon. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, is a Spacebook production for the Fandom Podcast Network with music by Problem Being.